Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of LiR Confidential on LiRmedia.tv. Our email is info@LiRmedia.tv, and just to confuse you further, text line is 089 444 9525, and I'm delighted that our guest this evening on LiR Media is Councillor Conor Sheehan. I never thought I'd say that, Conor, but Councillor Conor Sheehan of the Labour Party, and to be completely correct, Limerick City North. I wanted to get that right as well, Conor. Welcome along, Conor.
Thanks very much, Pat. Thanks very much for having me on. It's great to be able to join you this evening.
Thank you very much. And we'll start at the end, so to speak. When you heard your name called out, I presume you were at the count.
Yeah.
Well, you were. I thought, I'm looking at the figures there before we came on air. When did you know you had it in the bag, as they say? Because you were high up in the first preference, anyway.
To be honest with you, I had it was a very strange day. The day I was elected, it was a really long day. It was also one of my best friend's birthdays, and she was pregnant at the time, so we couldn't do anything alcohol related.
Yeah.
So we decided we'd go to Dromoland for afternoon tea. And I remember I was sitting outside in Dromoland, and there's a fella playing the piano, right? And like normally if you were out there, you'd hear your man playing the piano. The atmosphere is beautiful. I turned around to two of my friends. I said, if he doesn't stop playing that stupid piano, I'm going to jump out the window. They had to actually take my phone off me, because I kept checking my phone, because like I knew that I was in the mix, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it could have gone either way, because there was 7 seats and I was elected 5th out of 7, but I was actually 6th on the first preferences, I think. You see, what can happen, you see, as well, is if you don't get the transfers. Now, I was very lucky. I was very, very transfer friendly. But if you don't get the transfers, you could go from thinking, oh, I should be grand, to then realising later on, that somebody was going to...
Did you have a running mate?
I did, yeah.
So that helped, because I noticed the last 2 seats went to Sinn Féin, and both those candidates were together, so to speak,
Yeah, and the thing about Sinn Féin as well is they had superb vote management. They ran 3 to get 2, and when John Nugent was eliminated, his transfers literally split fairly evenly to elect both John Costello and Sharon Benson.
Yeah.
But I knew myself that I knew I had it once. I'd say about 10 or 11 o'clock at night on the Sunday night. You see, I wasn't elected till about 5:10 in the morning, but about 10 or 11 the night before, I had overtaken certain candidates.
Right.
And I had gone out. I knew I was ahead, for example, of I was 200 votes at one stage, nearly ahead of Sharon Benson. And then I knew that the last seat was between her and Pat O'Neill from Fianna Fáil. And I sort of knew at the time that I was far enough ahead that neither of them could catch me.
Yes.
But I suppose, to be honest with you, it was quite funny when I was elected, because basically they'd never had 18 counts in a council election in Limerick City ever before. That's actually a record. And the returning officer decided, a lot of the time, like if it's a general election, at about 1:30 in the morning, they'll make a call. They'll say, look, we're adjourning. We'll come back tomorrow morning. But they decided, no, there's no point adjourning. It's only one electoral area in the whole council. We've filled all the council seats. We'll keep going. So the count centre emptied and emptied and emptied. And by the time I actually got elected, and the same time as John and Sharon, it was actually so hollow out there, because everybody had left.
They were there all day.
They were there since 9 o'clock the previous morning.
Yeah.
So I just remember the few people that, when people were clapping us, and by us I mean myself and the 2 Sinn Féin councillors, it was really echoey, when a room is really empty.
Yeah, plenty of room.
Yeah.
But prior to that, where are you from, Conor? Where did you grow up?
I was basically born and bred in Corbally. This actually isn't. I lived originally when I was a young child, maybe about probably 500 meters from where I live now in a different house. So I've lived
Yeah,
in the Lower Park area my entire life. My family originally, they come on one side, they come from St. Mary's Parish, and on the other side, they originally came from Garryowen.
excellent, excellent. Now, would you describe your awareness growing up? Would you describe your family as particularly political?
Um, I'd say no more political than the average family in the sense that, you know, like they weren't politically active, or they weren't particularly aligned to one political party, but you know, you'd often thrash things out at the dinner table, you know, the way many other families would. So I suppose in one sense my family were political, but not in the sense of being organized and active within a party.
So you went to school locally anyway?
I did. I went to the Gael School originally when it was in Cray Lane, and then I went to Croom to secondary school because there's a big shortage of school places when I was starting secondary school, and I suppose I was probably drawn by the lure of the laptops, and then from there I went to Mary I, did a BA in liberal arts, and then I did a master's in DCU in journalism.
Now, I mean, obviously the sitting TD is retired now. That's Jan O'Sullivan, and she was Minister for Education for a period of time, amongst many other things. You became parliamentary assistant to her, did you?
I did. I worked for Jan for a while. I'd say between 2017 and 2020.
That was
Um,
a difficult time now. How did you find it yourself, knocking around
um,
Leinster House?
well, to be honest with you, I spent. It was a funny time. I spent the vast majority of the time working in the constituency office, but I suppose, like with the last Dáil, you know, nobody thought when Enda Kenny finally got the minority government together after 70 odd days, nobody thought it would last any longer than say 12 months to 18 months.
Yeah.
And you know, it sort of defied everything and lasted nearly 4 years. And that was one of the reasons why, you know, I suppose, like, I mean, I know with my own party that, like, had that maybe Jan mightn't have ran in the last election had we had the certainty of knowing when the government was formed in 2016 that it might last 3 to 4 years. You
Yeah.
know, we thought we were facing into an election within 6 to 12 to 18 to 24 months, you know.
Yes. Now, the Labour Party itself, I thought myself on a personal level that there'd be a new candidate this time around in Limerick, that the Labour Party, that Jan O'Sullivan, there was rumours, of course, there's always rumours around politicians when they've served a long time in office anyway, and they've stood for election after election. But I thought this was an opportune time for the Labour Party itself to maybe stand a new candidate, but they didn't do so. But of course, we know ourselves that the tide went out for not alone the Labour Party and other people. It came very much in for Sinn Féin and the Greens this time round, in the general election I'm speaking about now, of course, Conor. How did the Labour Party feel itself then when it felt that it didn't have any representation this time around? Obviously, it's a serious blow for any party not to have a TD anyway.
I like look, I can't deny it was bad, it was bleak, but do you know what? Like, it's in the past now. That's the way I look at it, and we have to pick ourselves up. You know, one of the problems that I found internally with the Labour Party was that a lot of the time the party was sort of half haunted by the period it spent in government. Um, and, you know, like with sort of a traumatic experience, you know, there was a constant among certain people, they'd relive it and relive it and relive it. Like, and do you know what? In a couple of weeks' time, the Labour Party will have been out of government longer than it was in government between 2011 and 2016. Like, once next February comes, the party will be out as long as it was in. and it's time, you know, to draw a clear line in the sand and to move on. And that's what we intend to do locally. So I
I suppose
suppose,
I thought myself that my fellow Malaman would be the leader, but anyway, it wasn't to be. That's Sean Sherlock.
yeah.
No, Sean.
But I suppose from Sean's point of view, like, I think, you know, like, to be party leader, number one, like, you have to be really willing to put in the hard yards. Number two, it takes you away an awful lot from. It
Yeah,
would take Sean away an awful lot from his beloved Mallow, you know.
yeah.
And away from his wife and young children as well. So
Oh,
I
yeah,
suppose
there's that consideration. You're dead right, Conor. Yeah.
from Sean's point of view, like, I mean, I'll tell you this. I would not do the job of the leader of the Labour Party. In fact, I wouldn't want to do the job to be the leader of any political party, because
Well, it's a huge challenge.
it's a massive, massive job. Whether it be the leader of Sinn Féin, whether it be the leader of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. I mean, you look at, say, for example, Mary Lou MacDonald, and irrespective of anyone's opinion of her, I mean, the woman was seriously, seriously ill with COVID-19 a couple of months ago.
She was, yeah. And I don't
And
think she's fully recovered.
yeah, like, look, I wouldn't be one to cast aspersions either, but she said it herself, you know. I mean, I don't like, but yet she's had to throw herself back into the
Yeah.
big leadership role that she
Yeah,
has.
I interviewed there a couple of days ago, Mairead Farrell. You know, Mairead Farrell, she's
Yeah,
the MTD up the road in Galway, you know. She's only a young woman, but she was a local councillor like yourself, you know, and in Galway, and she lost her seat, but she got into the Dáil this time with the Tide. But she was telling me, like, it is, she's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in Dublin, full on, Monday and Friday clinics, and obviously the weekends as well. So it's a 365-day-a-week job in reality, even though it shouldn't be, you know. That's the way we are, you know. We'd probably say, we'll call out to Conor's house now, lads. He'll be doing nothing on Sunday. We'll call out to him and we'll get the problem solved. You have all that going on as well. But getting into the local politics here, Conor, well, you knew your way. You had knowledge. You worked with Jan. So it wasn't new to you. I mean, you wouldn't be caught in the lights or anything. And you're well able to talk anyway. As long as I know you, you're always well able to hold your own anyway, more or less. But I'm just saying, how did you find... I think, is it 4 Labour people are in the council?
three.
3. So you have 3 out of 40, is it?
Yeah.
God, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of councillors. I mean, 40 councillors.
Yeah.
How is the meeting? I mean, I presume you wouldn't have full meetings all the time of the 40 councillors because you get nothing done.
No, every second month. In fact,
it's divided up, is it?
Yeah, like, I mean, they have municipal districts in the county, and we meet every month as Metropolitan District, which is the 21 councillors based within the city.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, like, I would bring 80% plus of my business to Metropolitan meetings, because the full council meetings can be very, very long, and they're often dominated by county people and county issues, you know. So I suppose, like, 3 out of 21 doesn't seem as minute as 3 out of 40, you know.
And how difficult, I mean, for instance, if you perceive, and actually not perceive, but if you see an actual serious problem, whether it be traffic or management of some sort in your life, how long does it take that idea to become emotion, and emotion itself to get onto the floor of the council, the full council meeting?
Well, I suppose the full councillors are only allowed to bring one motion before the full council, each individual councillor, because if you brought more than one motion, if they were to change the standing orders, allow councillors bring 3 or 4, you know, you'd have to block off Monday. You'd be there till 9 or 10 o'clock Monday night. So I suppose, but at the Metropolitan meeting, you can bring 3 motions. So, like, but you see, motions are mainly for policy issues, like anything operational. Like, if there's an issue with stuff like that, you'd log that directly with the engineer, and then, to be honest with you, you'd plague the life out of them until they did something about it.
Oh, I see. So if there are people getting knocked down left, right, and centre at a level crossing, surely that would be a serious issue for the council.
Well, it would be, but it would depend on, now, if it was something serious, like, you would put it in as a motion.
Right.
But if it was something like, for example, say if there was a cracked curb outside your house and it was a tripping hazard, that you'd raise directly with the engineer.
And generally, of course, I know what you mean. I noticed in Shannon, where I live out in County Clare, there was a whole thing about footpaths for wheelchair users and all of that, and blind people walk around with their dogs. You know, they don't see the cracks in the footpaths, obviously. Now, yourself, the tradition of the Labour Party has been, probably you could say, overall, founded in 1912 up to now, has been more or less more positive than negative anyway, Conor, in the history of politics in Ireland. You yourself, I presume you'd have ambitions for the Dáil down the road.
Well, to be honest with you, Pat, I'll tell you this now. Like, it's like, look, my own attitude would be, I don't know, you know. I mean, like there are two things in politics that dictate everything, and that nobody has any control over, and it's luck and timing, you know. So sometimes, like, if you happen to be standing where you are at the right time, and, you know, I mean, if the ball comes your way, like, if the ball came my way, or as Boris Johnson once said, if the ball came loose from the back of the ruck, or whatever, you know, it's something I probably would consider. But at the same time, I'm not going to drive myself demented. Like, I'm not, you get certain people who are involved with politics, and they are absolutely obsessed with votes, first of all, and with sort of maybe becoming a TD. But, like, look, I have a life outside of politics as well. So, look, like, I'm it's not something I totally rule out, but at the same time, like, I could very well decide in a couple of years to go and do something else, you know.
Well, yeah, you have time on your side, but when you were going around to the doors, obviously you were going around in your locality, so people would know you, or they'd know of your family and all of that in local elections. You know what I mean? But how did the reception for the Labour Party, how did you find it overall in canvassing door to door? Obviously, I presume you canvassed as well for Jan O'Sullivan.
I did,
during the general election. How did you find that experience?
To be honest, in relation to myself, I really enjoyed the local election canvass. The only thing about it is, a local election campaign is a long, slow campaign. It takes 3 to 4 to 5 months. There's an awful lot of walking involved. Contrary to what anybody tells you, you don't lose any weight, because all you eat is battered sausages and chips throughout the whole thing.
Rubbish, yeah.
But the general election is different. It's 5 weeks. It's much more intense, but it's shorter. But I suppose what I found in terms of us with the general election this time was that, you know, like, there's worse things, Pat, than being the subject of people's ire, which we maybe were in 2016. It's worse to actually nearly be sort of half glossed over completely, you know? Like antipathy is worse than hostility.
You prefer to be shouted at than ignored.
Well, at least if somebody's shouting at you, you're on their radar, you know? They're thinking about you.
Yeah.
You come into their frame of thought, but antipathy is just like,
it's very, very hard one.
Yeah, it's a very, and do you know, somebody said to me, a wise man once said to me before, that you fear the electorate the most when they're being merely civil. That when they're sort of going,
that's very true. That's very true. I noticed that myself. I remember, of course, you did history. I remember my dad bringing me around as a small boy canvassing for Dan Desmond in the old Mid Cork constituency. He was a stalwart. He was the husband of Eileen Desmond, who was in the Labour Party, and she became an MEP, one of their first MEPs in the old, what was it called then?
Munster, I'd say.
Yeah, Munster constituency. And the Labour Party is not, I mean, of course, it's a huge challenge to Alan Kelly. And how would you describe Alan Kelly now to me?
How would I describe Alan Kelly?
I won't tell anyone now, of course, you know that.
To be honest, like, the way I would, the main word that I would use to describe Alan was, like, regardless of what anybody would tell you about him, and people either, you know, he's like Marmite in one sense. People either love him or they loathe him. But the one thing that his detractors and the people who love him cannot take away from him is they can't take his work ethic away from him. I mean, the man works 16 and 17-hour days. So he's tenacious and hardworking. And one of the main reasons I backed Alan as well is I just felt that we'd been through such a bad election. We had been through such an experience whereby nobody paid us any attention, good or bad, that I just felt that, you know, Alan is a bruiser. And that was what I felt that we needed. And that he would put the party out there front and centre. But look, I think it'll take a long time, because, you know, there was a lot of people very disillusioned by the period that we spent in government.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to pretend that that's not the case. But at the same time, we have to go out there and prove to people that, number one, we're forward looking, and number two, that we've actually learnt some of the lessons. And I think Alan very much understood that, because I had a conversation with him very soon after the general election, and he turned around to me and he said, he's right about this, that no small party should ever do a full 5 years in government.
There is something certainly, well, you know, you look at the past history, the recent history as well, and that rings true for even like the way back to the Progressive Democrats' time, you know. And even though it had very good ministers, it still didn't stand to them at the end of the day. But I think Alan Kelly himself has had to fight hard to keep his own seat, so he knows exactly what the challenges are, I'm sure. I thought he came to the fore in the, you know, all these inquiries that were on into the Garda Commissioner and all of that. I thought he came to the fore very much in that, you know, in hammering away at getting answers, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also felt, where I felt he personally came to the fore was in relation to Vicky Phelan and the women who were affected by the cervical check, you know. And I think that was one of the reasons, I think in particular, why Alan is now the leader of the Labour Party, because, like, before that, you know, Alan would have primarily, as you know, as I know, been associated with water, you know, and that wasn't exactly. I think, you know, look.
Well, I think sometimes, and not making any excuses whatsoever, sometimes you can be in a job and events can overtake you in that job. And well, his name is synonymous with Irish water. That's it. But that's over and done with. I think that issue is settled, except, you know, that the only fear in the back of our heads as ordinary punters is the commodifying of water, which is a disaster just across the road from us in the United Kingdom, as you know yourself.
Yeah.
It's an utter disaster. You hear some horrific stories as they privatise water. I just hope that parties like yourselves and people like yourselves will keep a careful watch on that one anyway, at least, you know. LiR Confidential is the programme here on lirmedia.tv, and I'm delighted that Councillor Conor Sheehan from Limerick City North, all the way from Corbally, is our special guest today. He's not giving anything away about his future Dáil plans or not. We don't know. We'll have to wait for a few more years for that. But Conor, the routine day-to-day call on you as a councillor, I'm interested in that because we all see the glamour side of it and the clapping and the suit and taking photographs with the Lord Mayor and all that. But you yourself, what's the routine day for you as a councillor? Have you a job as well?
Well, I do. I actually I'm working for the party now as an organizer.
Oh, you
I've
were doing
started
that before you got elected, were you?
recently. No, I've started as a regional organizer, so I'm sort of responsible for assisting councillors, finding candidates, getting organizations back up and running. Because the problem that we have had is that because we lost so many, look, we had three disastrous four bad elections more or less in a row.
That's right.
Going back as far as 2014. And when you lose councillors and TDs, a lot of the time, the organisation that's around them can just fall into the ground. And part of my role will be to get that organisation in communities where we had representation before active again, to see if we could get councillors elected. So, but in terms of my own role as a councillor, I suppose, like, my day-to-day depends on whether I have council meetings or not. Now, because of all this COVID, I spend an awful lot of time sitting in front of the screen
Like
that
you
I'm
are
now.
now.
Yeah, and I do an awful lot of Zoom calls. Sometimes I feel like I do so many Zoom calls that sometimes I literally go and close my eyes for 10 minutes in between them, because I
Yes.
feel like my eyes are going glossy from staring at the iPad.
Yes. Oh, you're on the iPad. You'll have to get the party headquarters to get you a huge 40-inch screen. You'll be fine then.
I
But
vary between the iPad and the iPhone. Sometimes I'm on the iPhone, sometimes I'm on the iPad.
and what about your organisation in the universities?
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the universities where we're weak is actually the University of Limerick. We need to get active again in the University of Limerick. But we're fairly active in UCC, very active in the colleges in Dublin, active in NUI, Galway. We used to have a fairly active branch in Limerick, but what happened was the people who ran it graduated and nobody new came in, and it sort of just
Yeah,
died a death, unfortunately.
yeah. Of course, as you said, with these strange times we're in now with COVID and all of that, you cannot just ask a couple of hundred students to meet you in the hall. You can't do that
No, you
anymore.
can't.
So I can see the challenges for you, not alone. It's twofold, really. Hopefully, this idea. What do you think of some of the, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? Directives from the government recently on this COVID situation where you can have 50 people at a wedding. I'm conscious because my own mum isn't well now. She's 91 in a home. We're not looking forward to her passing away, but you can have 50 people at a wedding, yet the 50 people at the funeral can't go into the same place for a meal afterwards.
Look, I mean, in one sense, in more senses than that, some of the regulations don't make sense. One of the issues that I have is with the issue of sick pay. And we have a bill going through the Dáil at the moment to give a statutory entitlement to sick pay, like people who work in public and civil service do. And like, sick pay isn't a perk. Like, what's happening at the moment and what will happen during the winter is people who are, say, infected but asymptomatic will get a choice between going to work and not getting paid. So if you're faced with that choice and you're on the breadline and you go to work, you infect other people. So the whole thing gets so much worse. I agree with you about that. I think in terms of funerals, I think another issue is like some of the restrictions that are there around maternity services. The fact that there are women in some maternity wards who literally have to do most of their labour alone.
Themselves, I heard that going on. It's appalling.
And a lot of the, and even like a lot of the discourse, like, say, one of the big issues at the moment is household gatherings. But like, they kept the wet pubs closed for so long, when in my view, They should have opened the whole lot in July.
Together, yeah.
Subjected them all to the same regulations.
Exactly.
If they found that things were getting out of hand, bring forward the closing time to 11, and then if that doesn't work, maybe close them at 10:30, because
Yes.
it's not the old fella living in a village, living in Galbally or Ballylanders, going down for a pint in his local, you know, in a pub that's normally so empty. It probably did social distancing before it was even a thing.
It did.
It's the 40 people gathering in a house that's causing the thing to spread. So that to give people other social outlets, so that then, you know, you can say to people very clearly as well, don't gather in one another's houses. Don't have communions at home. Don't have confirmations at home. Don't have house parties.
Yeah, but also, and not to dwell too much on, because it's people don't even want to talk about it anymore because they're so fed up of it in one level, you know. And I think, Conor, as more and more people believe less in the instructions, you know, that's when the trouble will start. Like, all the supermarkets were left open. Crowds and crowds of people shopping certainly did not help when the virus was around the place. And they left all the small shops closed.
Yeah, look, it's look, I mean, there were a number of sort of things probably at the initial stage of the pandemic that if you were to go back and do them again, you wouldn't do them. You know, I think um I think initially they took the rash decision to lock everything down because they were primarily concerned with capacity in the health service to deal with people, you know. I think initially they were probably expecting a lot more people to be infected. But I think the issue is now coming into the winter, we're in a very dicey situation at the moment, in my view. And I think one of the things that the government should do as well is to offer all citizens the flu jab, because like I think you'll have people in November, December, January, they won't know what they have. They don't know, will it be COVID? They don't know, is it flu? They don't know, is it this? But whereas like if you aggressively roll out the flu jab, you somehow counter flu to a certain degree, which would free up capacity to concentrate on COVID.
Absolutely. And while you're on the COVID, that bill you're referring to going through, will it get backing? Have you got backing for it?
Well, the government, unfortunately, the government have a majority this time. So the
Yeah,
government have
yeah,
kicked
yeah.
the can in it. They're saying, "Oh, we'll review it within 6 months." But sure, it's designed to deal with sickness in the winter, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and
And
what
like,
about, not Colly Kosher, what about the mother who's at work and has to bring her child home from school
yeah,
and will lose a day's pay?
well, the bill proposes a special 6 week, a special COVID force majeure leave as well, so that if somebody has to do that, that they'll be paid
Right.
while say if they have to self isolate at home with a 4-year-old
Yeah.
because there's been an issue in a preschool, that they would be paid for that. Like I mean, the people who said this needed to be dealt with, they're not politicians. It's Paul Reid, the HSE chief. It's Dr. Cullum Henry, the chief clinical officer, and it's the acting chief medical officer, Dr. Ronan Glynn, and they all separately identified sick pay as an issue.
And the government's response to the Labour bill is, we look at it.
We'll look at it.
Yeah, that's a code for just go away, is it?
Yeah, basically.
So before we finish, Conor, and I know you're a busy man, our special guest this evening, and we're delighted to have him on LiR Media. We'll have him on again, of course, very soon, is Conor Sheehan, and of the Labour Party. And how do you find interacting with of course, when you're a local councillor, you have to cooperate, certainly on certain topics and things. And have you made good friends politically across the spectrum, do you feel, at this stage on the city council?
Yeah, like I know sometimes they say you've no friends in politics, but at the same time, there are people that I would be very friendly with, and there are some of them I consider to be friends, even from different political parties. Because you see, the thing is, like, if you go in there the whole time with a very partisan view, you know, oftentimes you need support of other councillors in your area in order to push an issue. So if you're looking for money for something, I mean, say it's money for a playground or to develop community facilities or whatever, you know, that issue itself doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're Sinn Féin, Labour, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, independent. If you're all want to drive the one issue, you have to work together to get it over the line, you know.
And before we leave you completely, who are your put you on the spot now? Maybe who are your political heroes growing up?
Well, I suppose in many ways I would have always admired Dick Spring. I always thought when he was leader of the Labour Party, particularly around the time of the beef tribunal, I thought he was excellent. I suppose as somebody in Limerick, it would be remiss of me to say that, you know, I would have looked up to Jim Kemmy as well. I always found Dennis Healy, the former British Chancellor, very entertaining. In particular, he had a great line about Thatcher. You know, he said, when the rest of Europe is marching forward, the Prime Minister is walking around muttering imprecations like an old bag lady. You know, I always thought he had a great sort of
Dennis Healy was great. Yeah,
he had a great turn of phrase. You know. And I suppose on the council myself, there are certain councillors that I would, you know, like, I mean, I always find Kevin Sheehan from Askeaton very entertaining to listen to, because he sits at the back, like, and he throws curveballs just to irritate his own party colleagues, and then he sort of sits back and laughs, and they all start killing one another like cats, you know.
Yeah, you need one of them at every council meeting, do you?
You do. You need, because sometimes, like, you know, life can be dull and dreary enough that you need a bit of entertainment, you know.
And have you any thoughts on the new leader of the British Labour Party?
Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
I do.
He's referred to as the posh boy now, with all the other posh boys.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that, I mean, if you look at the polls in Britain, I mean, Labour are sort of level pegging at the moment with the Tories. I'm firmly of the belief that anything nearly is better than Boris Johnson, because, I mean, I just find that Boris Johnson has more positions than the Kama Sutra. You know, it's that he's not driven by ideology. He's not driven by anything other than a desire to be Prime Minister. And he's not actually very good at the job. And I think that when you look at the pandemic, you look at how out of control it is, and you see, like, I just think somebody like Keir Starmer, I would have much more confidence in him dealing with coronavirus, because I feel he's much more serious and much more level-headed. And I think I think COVID has changed everything in many ways. And I think, you know, I mean, Boris Johnson isn't very funny. When Boris Johnson was funny and entertaining, and he was a bit of crack when he was on Have I Got News For You, and even when he was Mayor of London. When you see somebody like that trying to navigate a country through the worst global health crisis in a generation, and Brexit, you know, it doesn't inspire confidence. And the one thing I like about Keir Starmer is he's shown himself since he became Labour leader as well, not to want to sort of reopen, you know, the old Brexit arguments. You know, he clearly understands that the general election last December settled those, and that he wants to move forward, which I think is important, because I think Boris Johnson, if he had his way, would spend the next 4 years rowing with Keir Starmer over the dispatch box about Brexit and Europe and Brussels. Meanwhile, that would serve as a red herring, because it would distract completely from his own government's disastrous handling of the pandemic.
Of course, Brexit won't be simple. All we know is that Britain will be leaving, but we hope to be more positive than what it is now. I think this is just the final flutter of sabre rattling, I suppose. But of course, we don't have to look very far for I suppose when we look at our own Taoiseach and Taoiseach here in the present government, it's wouldn't inspire confidence either, Conor, would it?
No, in particular, I think, I mean, it's a funny old government, because you have a Taoiseach who's in power 10 minutes, but sort of sounds and looks like he's been in power for the last 10 years, and you have a Taoiseach that was in power for 3 years, that has sort of reinvented himself as a comeback kid, and sort of seems to have admonished himself for everything that he was roundly rejected at the ballot box for in January, and seems to have totally reinvented himself, and sort of he's managed to sort of just brush everything off. I mean, it's one of the most remarkable
It is.
things ever, and I think for all Leo Varadkar's faults, and there are many, and I disagree with him about an awful lot more than I agree with him with, he's a better communicator, I think, than Micheál Martin.
And they all have the same access to the plethora of advisors they have. You would think that he'd be able to get it. You would think that someone, we won't labour on this too long, you think someone who waited so long to get his opportunity and then
would know what he wanted to do with it.
And I suppose, like you and I both know, Conor, we're long enough around to know that, although you're much younger than I am, that sometimes government doesn't suit all politicians.
Well, you see, I think what you're seeing with Micheál Martin as well is, people forget this. When Micheál Martin was a minister more than a decade ago, like, Micheál Martin wasn't exactly world renowned for his decisiveness. And I think that sort of hesitant, indecisive nature, like, it's really coming to the fore, and the humming and the hawing and the oohing and the awing. And I don't think it suits the job of being Taoiseach during the worst global health crisis in 100 years. But I think most of Fianna Fáil's errors since they came into power again have been all self-inflicted.
They have, yeah. We won't mention the Minister for Agriculture. I don't think you'd ever want that job, would you?
Well, do you know what, Pat? If they keep cycling through it, they could come looking for me or you by
You
Christmas.
never know. You want to keep your suit pressed, as they say.
That's it. The new pair of wellies go through Agriculture House every 33 days.
It's been fantastic having you, and we were
Great.
delighted that you agreed to this. And of course, from LiR Media and LiR Confidential, we wish you, Conor Sheehan, Labour Councillor, just over 12 months in the job now, and I think you really settled in. We wish you all the very best.
Thanks very much,
for
Pat.
the future, and
Cheers.
we'll catch up with you again very soon. So
take care. Bye-bye.
Good night and God bless.